1 Kings 1. King David was getting old, and no matter how many blankets they put on him, he stayed cold. So his people decided to find him a young woman to take care of him and keep him warm. They found Abishag, a beautiful woman from Shunem, and she took care of the king, but he never slept with her. Meanwhile, David's son Adonijah started feeling himself. He was handsome, next in line after Absalom, and he decided to crown himself king without David's blessing. He got chariots, horses, and 50 men to run ahead of him like he was already royalty. Even worse, some of David's top people, Joab the general and Abiathar the priest, sided with him. But Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, and David's mighty warriors stayed loyal to David and didn't back Adonijah. Adonijah threw a big party, sacrificed animals, and invited his brothers and top officials to celebrate his so-called kingship. But he didn't invite Solomon, Nathan, or David's real supporters. Nathan saw what was happening and knew they had to move fast. He went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and told her to remind David about his promise, that Solomon was supposed to be king. Nathan said, "Girl, if we don't handle this now, you and Solomon gonna be in danger once David is gone." Bathsheba went straight to David, reminding him of his word, and while she was speaking, Nathan came in to confirm everything. David realized the urgency and made it official. Solomon was the rightful king. He told Zadok, Nathan, and Benaiah to put Solomon on David's own mule, anoint him as king, and blow the trumpet to let everybody know. They did exactly that, and the city went wild with celebration. When Adonijah and his crew heard the noise, they knew the party was over. Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, came in with the news. Solomon is officially king, and David himself made it happen. Adonijah panicked. He ran straight to the altar, grabbing the horns, begging Solomon not to kill him. Solomon spared his life, for now, but told him, "If you move right, you'll live, but if you try something slick, you're done." Moral of the story: power moves made without God's approval never last. Just because you want something don't mean it's yours. God's plan will always override human ambition, so stay in alignment and move with wisdom. 1 Kings 2. David knew his time was almost up, so he called Solomon in for some real talk. He said, "Son, I'm about to go the way of all men, but listen. Be strong, act like a man, and follow God's laws. Stay on his path, and he'll keep his promise to our family. If we stay faithful, there will always be one of us on the throne." Then David gave Solomon some unfinished business. "You remember Joab, right? That man killed 2 of my best generals, Abner and Amasa, for no reason. He got too much blood on his hands. Don't let him get away with it. And Shimei, the one who cursed me when I was running from Absalom, I let him slide, but you're smart. Handle him the way you see fit. But Barzillai, that man was loyal when I needed help. Make sure his family is taken care of." Then David passed away and was buried in the city of David. Solomon took over, and his kingdom was locked in. Now, Adonijah, David's other son who had tried to take the throne before, came sneaking around again. He went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and asked her to do him a favor. "I know Solomon is king now, but can you ask him to give me Abishag as my wife?" Bathsheba brought the request to Solomon, but Solomon saw right through it. He knew Adonijah was still trying to claim the throne, so he said, "That's it." He just played himself. Solomon sent Benaiah, and Adonijah was executed on the spot. Then Solomon dealt with the others who had been disloyal. Abiathar the priest got banished. He wasn't killed because he had once been loyal to David, but he was stripped of his position. Joab, knowing his time was up, ran to the altar, but Solomon wasn't having it. Benaiah took him out right there. And as for Shimei, Solomon told him, "Stay in Jerusalem. Don't ever leave and you'll live." But 3 years later, Shimei left to chase after some runaway servants. When Solomon heard about it, he said, You had one job. And that was the end of Shimei. With all the threats handled, Solomon's kingdom was fully secured. Moral of the story: when God puts you in position, move wisely and handle business. Loyalty matters, but so does accountability. Sometimes securing your destiny means cutting ties with people who can't be trusted. Solomon wasn't cruel. He was calculated. There's a time for mercy and a time for justice, and wisdom is knowing the difference. 1 Kings 3. Solomon made a power move by marrying Pharaoh's daughter, strengthening his alliance with Egypt. He was getting settled as king, but the people were still sacrificing at the high places, since there wasn't a temple for God yet. Solomon himself went to Gibeon, the most important high place, and offered 1,000 burnt offerings. That night, God came to him in a dream and said, "Ask me for whatever you want." Solomon didn't ask for money, fame, or power. He said, "God, you made me king, but I'm young and don't really know what I'm doing. These people are many, and I need wisdom to lead them right. Give me a discerning heart so I can judge fairly." God was pleased. He said, "Since you asked for wisdom instead of riches or revenge on your enemies, I'll give you what you asked for, and more. You'll be the wisest man to ever live, and on top of that I'll give you wealth and honor too. And if you follow my ways, I'll bless you with a long life." Solomon woke up and realized it was a dream, but he knew it was real. He went back to Jerusalem, worshipped God, and threw a feast for his people. Not long after, his wisdom was put to the test. 2 women came to him with a wild case. They both lived in the same house and had newborns, but one baby had died in the night. The mother of the dead baby switched the babies while the other woman was sleeping. Now they were both claiming to be the real mother of the living child. Solomon listened, then said, "Bring me a sword." Everyone was confused. Then he said, "Cut the baby in half and give each woman a piece." The real mother immediately cried out, "No! Let her have the baby. Just don't kill him." But the other woman said, "Go ahead, split him. If I can't have him, neither can she." Solomon knew right then who the real mother was. He gave the baby to the woman who was willing to give him up to save his life. Word spread fast. Everybody heard about Solomon's judgment, and they knew this king had God-given wisdom like no one else. Moral of the story: wisdom is the real flex. Solomon could have asked for anything, but he chose understanding, and because of that, God gave him everything else too. When you lead with wisdom, people respect you, problems get solved, and blessings follow. Seek wisdom first, and the rest will come. 1 Kings 4. Solomon's kingdom was running like a well-oiled machine. He had top officials managing everything: priests, scribes, military leaders, and 12 district governors who made sure the palace was stocked with food year-round. Each governor was responsible for providing supplies 1 month out of the year, so the burden was evenly spread. Under Solomon, Israel was thriving. From the Euphrates River to Egypt's border, people were living good. Everybody had land, food, and peace. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. His officials made sure nothing was lacking, and there was plenty of food at the king's table. But Solomon wasn't just wealthy. He was wise. God had given him a level of understanding beyond anyone before or after him. He was smarter than all the famous wise men of the East and Egypt, and people from everywhere came to hear him speak. He wrote 3,000 proverbs and over 1,000 songs. He could break down nature, talking about plants, animals, birds, and fish. Kings and scholars traveled just to hear his wisdom. Moral of the story: when God's favor is on you, wisdom and prosperity go hand in hand. Solomon didn't just rule. He led with wisdom, structure, and order, and because of that, his kingdom flourished. True success isn't just about wealth. It's about balance, strategy, and making sure everyone connected to you is thriving too. 1 Kings 5. Word had spread far and wide that Solomon was king, and Hiram, the king of Tyre, was one of the first to show love. He had been tight with David, so when he heard Solomon was on the throne, he sent messengers to congratulate him. Solomon hit him back with a request. You know, my father David wanted to build a temple for God, but he was too busy handling wars. Now that we have peace, I'm ready to make it happen. Your people are known for their skills in cutting the best cedar trees from Lebanon. Let's work together. I'll pay your workers whatever they need. Hiram was all in. He sent word back. I see God's hand on you. Let's do it. So they made a deal. Hiram's men would cut and transport the timber, and in return, Solomon would supply him with food for his household. Every year, Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 kor of wheat and 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. With this partnership locked in, Solomon put together a massive workforce. 30,000 men were sent to Lebanon in shifts, 10,000 at a time, rotating every month. He had 80,000 stonecutters in the mountains, 70,000 carriers, and 3,300 supervisors making sure everything ran smoothly. They quarried large, high-quality stones for the temple's foundation, and the builders of Solomon and Hiram worked side by side, getting everything prepared. Morale of the story: big visions require teamwork. Solomon knew he couldn't do it alone, so he partnered with the right people and structured everything with wisdom. When God gives you a purpose, He'll also send the right connections to help bring it to life. You just have to move strategically and be willing to collaborate. 1 Kings 6. In the 480th year after Israel left Egypt, Solomon finally started building God's temple. It was in the 4th year of his reign, in the month of Ziv, April-May. The temple was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. He made the walls out of the best stone and covered everything inside with cedar wood. No stone was visible. He even overlaid the whole interior with pure gold, making sure the house of God looked nothing less than glorious. At the front, he built a porch that was 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep. Inside, he created the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, where the Ark of the Covenant would sit. This room was 30 feet by 30 feet and completely covered in gold. He also had 2 massive cherubim, each 15 feet tall, made of olive wood and overlaid with gold, their wings stretching across the room. The temple walls were decorated with intricate carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. Every single detail was intentional. The doors to the most holy place were made of olive wood, carved with designs and covered in gold. Even the floors were overlaid with gold. One unique thing about the construction: Solomon had the stones cut and shaped at the quarry, so by the time they were brought to the temple site, there was no sound of hammers, chisels, or iron tools. The work was silent, showing the temple was being built in peace. During construction, God spoke to Solomon. If you walk in my ways, follow my commands, and stay faithful, I will keep my promise to David. I will dwell among my people Israel, and I won't abandon them. It took Solomon 7 years to complete the temple, but when it was done, it was magnificent, fit for the presence of God. Moral of the story: excellence honors God. Solomon made sure every detail of the temple reflected God's greatness. He didn't cut corners. He built with intention, patience, and reverence. When you're doing something for God, don't half-step. Give it your best, because what you build for Him will last. 1 Kings 7. After finishing the temple, Solomon built his own palace, and it took almost twice as long, 13 years. His house was massive, made of the best materials, and designed with just as much care as the temple. One of the standout sections was the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon, a grand hall supported by 45 cedar pillars. He also built a throne room where he would judge cases, and a separate house for Pharaoh's daughter, his wife. For the temple, Solomon brought in a skilled craftsman named Hiram, not the king, but a man from Tyre. Hiram was a master in working with bronze, and he handled all the major metalwork for the temple. He made 2 huge bronze pillars, 18 feet tall and 12 feet around. He named them Yashin, he establishes, and Boaz, in him is strength, symbolizing God's firm foundation. He also made a giant bronze basin called the Sea, which was 15 feet across, rested on 12 bronze oxen, and held thousands of gallons of water for the priests to use for purification. Along with this, he crafted 10 bronze water carts, 10 smaller basins, and countless other tools and decorations. Every single detail, from the temple's doors to its lampstands, was carefully designed and made of the finest materials. When all the work was finished, Solomon had everything brought into the temple, including the gold and silver his father David had dedicated to God. Moral of the story: excellence requires time, skill, and the right people. Solomon didn't do it all alone. He brought in experts and spared no expense in making sure everything was done with quality. When you're building something great, don't rush it, and don't be afraid to get help. The right team can take your vision to the next level. 1 Kings 8. Once the temple was finished, it was time to bring in the Ark of the Covenant, the ultimate symbol of God's presence. Solomon gathered all the elders, priests, and leaders of Israel to Jerusalem for a grand ceremony. The priests carried the ark from the old tabernacle in Zion and placed it in the most holy place inside the temple, right under the wings of the massive gold cherubim. As soon as the priests left the inner sanctuary, a thick cloud filled the temple. This was God's glory showing up in a powerful way. The presence was so heavy that the priests couldn't even stand to minister. Solomon saw this and said, "The Lord has chosen to dwell in thick darkness, but now I have built a house for him to live in forever." Then Solomon stood before the whole assembly, lifted his hands toward heaven, and prayed a powerful dedication prayer. He praised God for keeping his promises and asked him to continue blessing David's lineage as long as they stayed faithful. He prayed that whenever Israel sinned and turned back to God, whether it was in war, famine, exile, or personal struggles, God would hear their prayers and forgive them. He even prayed for foreigners, saying that when people from other nations came to worship, God should hear them too, so that the whole world would know his name. After the prayer, Solomon blessed the people and reminded them to stay loyal to God. Then he offered sacrifices, so many that they couldn't even be counted. They celebrated for 14 days straight, worshiping, feasting, and rejoicing in what God had done. Finally, Solomon sent everyone home, and they left with glad hearts, knowing they had witnessed something historic, the establishment of God's house in Israel. Moral of the story: when you honor God, he shows up. Solomon didn't just build the temple. He dedicated it, prayed over it, and made sure the people understood its purpose. When you put God first, he fills your life with his presence, and blessings follow. Stay aligned and watch how he moves. 1 Kings 9. After Solomon finished building the temple and his palace, God showed up again like he did before. He told Solomon, "I heard your prayer, and I chose this temple as the spot where my presence will be. If you and your people stay loyal to me, follow my ways, and keep my commandments, then I'll keep my promise to David. Your family will always have a king on the throne of Israel. But if y'all turn your back on me, chase other gods, and start wilding out, then it's gonna be bad. I'll take my presence away from this temple. Israel will be a joke among nations, and this beautiful house y'all built will be nothing but ruins. People will pass by and be like, 'Dang, what happened?' And the answer will be, they forgot about their God, so he let them fall." After that, Solomon kept running things. He gave King Hiram of Tyre 20 towns as payment for all the cedar, cypress, and gold he supplied for the temple. But when Hiram saw them, he was like, "What is this? These towns ain't it." He even called them Kabul, meaning trash land. But still, Hiram and Solomon stayed cool, and Hiram had already given Solomon a whole lot of gold. Solomon was on his building grind, fortifying cities, setting up storage towns, and making sure Israel was secure. He put the remaining Canaanites to work as laborers, while the Israelites served as warriors and leaders. Pharaoh's daughter got her own palace, and Solomon made sure everything was running smooth. 3 times a year, Solomon made big sacrifices at the temple, worshiping God and keeping the people focused. Meanwhile, he had a navy set up with Hiram's help, and they were getting gold from foreign lands, bringing in wealth and keeping the kingdom thriving. Moral of the story: stay in alignment with God, and He'll keep you blessed. But if you turn away, don't be surprised when everything starts falling apart. Blessings come with obedience, but consequences come with disobedience. 1 Kings 10. Word got out about Solomon's wisdom and wealth, and the Queen of Sheba had to see it for herself. She pulled up to Jerusalem with a whole squad, bringing gold, spices, and jewels. She tested Solomon with deep questions, but he had answers for everything. Nothing stumped him. When she saw his palace, the temple, the food on his table, his servants dressed to the nines, and the way everything was running so smoothly, she was blown away. She told Solomon, "I heard the rumors, but this is next level. They didn't even tell me half of it. Your wisdom, your riches, this is beyond what I imagined. Your people are blessed to be around you, and your God is truly amazing for putting you in this position." She then gifted Solomon gold, spices, and precious stones, more than anyone had ever given before. Solomon's connections were on point. Hiram's fleet brought even more gold, rare wood, and jewels. Solomon used that wood to make steps for the temple and palace, plus some high-end instruments. Nobody had seen luxury like this before. Speaking of wealth, Solomon was stacking. He had gold everywhere, shields, thrones, cups, you name it. His throne was made of ivory and gold, with 6 steps leading up to it and lion statues on both sides. No other king had a setup like his. Silver? It was so common in Jerusalem that it was treated like rocks in the street. His ships kept bringing in gold, spices, and exotic animals, making his kingdom richer by the day. Every year, Solomon pulled in massive wealth, gold by the tons. He had chariots, horses, and trading networks that reached Egypt and beyond. Kings and rulers from all over came to hear his wisdom, bringing gifts just to be in his presence. Moral of the story: when you walk in wisdom and align with God, success follows. Solomon's wealth and influence weren't just about money, it was about divine favor. But don't get caught up in riches alone, because what matters most is staying connected to the source of your blessings. 1 Kings 11. For all his wisdom, Solomon had one major weakness: women. He had a thing for foreign women, and not just a few. He had 700 wives and 300 side pieces from nations God specifically warned Israel about. God had told them, "Don't mess with these women, because they'll turn your heart away from me." But Solomon didn't listen. He loved them anyway, and just like God said, they led him astray. As he got older, his wives convinced him to start worshiping their gods. Instead of staying loyal to the one true God, he started building altars for false gods like Ashtoreth, Moloch, and Chemosh. He even set up worship spots so his wives could offer sacrifices. This was a big betrayal. God had appeared to Solomon twice and warned him about this, but Solomon ignored it. So, God told him, "Since you turned your back on me and broke our covenant, I'm tearing the kingdom away from you. But out of respect for your father David, I won't do it while you're alive. Your son will feel the consequences, and even then, I won't take the whole kingdom. I'll leave one tribe for the sake of David and Jerusalem." After that, Solomon started running into problems. Enemies started rising up. Hadad from Edom, Rezon from Damascus, and Jeroboam, one of his own officials. Jeroboam was a strong leader, and when he saw how Solomon was slipping, he started making moves. One day, a prophet named Ahijah pulled Jeroboam aside, ripped his cloak into 12 pieces, and gave him 10. He told him, "God is giving you 10 tribes of Israel. Solomon's son will keep one, but you're about to rule most of the kingdom. Just follow God's ways, and he'll establish you like he did for David." Solomon heard about this and tried to have Jeroboam killed, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. After ruling for 40 years, Solomon passed away, and his son Rehoboam took over. Moral of the story: wisdom means nothing if you don't apply it. Solomon had everything: riches, power, and divine favor, but he let his desires lead him away from God. No matter how blessed you are, if you stop listening to God, you'll start losing what he gave you. Stay focused, stay faithful, and don't let distractions pull you off your path. 1 Kings 12. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. The people of Israel came to him with a request. "Your father had us working hard. If you lighten the load, we'll serve you faithfully." Rehoboam told them to give him 3 days to think it over. First, he asked the older, wiser advisors what to do. They told him, "If you ease up and treat the people right, they'll be loyal to you forever." But then he asked his young, reckless friends, and they told him, "Nah, let them know who's boss. Tell them, if you thought my father was tough, wait till you see how I get down." Rehoboam went with the bad advice. He told the people, "Y'all think my father was strict? I'm coming even harder. He used whips. I'm using scorpions." That was the last straw. The people of Israel said, "Forget you then. We don't need a king from David's line." 10 tribes broke away, leaving only Judah and Benjamin under Rehoboam's rule. Jeroboam, who had been hiding in Egypt, came back and was made king over the northern tribes, now called Israel. Rehoboam tried to send a taskmaster to force them back under his rule, but they killed the man on sight. Rehoboam barely escaped back to Jerusalem. Jeroboam, now king of Israel, got worried. He thought, "If my people keep going to Jerusalem to worship, they might turn back to Rehoboam." So instead of trusting God, he made 2 golden calves and told the people, "These are your gods now. No need to go to Jerusalem." He set them up in Bethel and Dan, built shrines, appointed fake priests, and even created his own festival. He led the people straight into idolatry, turning them away from God. Morale of the story: pride and bad advice can cost you everything. Rehoboam lost most of his kingdom because he let his ego lead instead of wisdom. Jeroboam had an opportunity to rule with God's favor, but fear made him create idols and pull people away from God. Leadership requires humility and obedience. When you forget that, downfall is just around the corner. 1 Kings 13. One day, God sent a prophet from Judah to confront King Jeroboam at the altar he built for his fake gods. The prophet called out, "This altar will be destroyed. A future king named Josiah will come and tear all this down." Then, as a sign, the altar split apart and ashes spilled out. Jeroboam didn't like that. He pointed at the prophet and said, "Seize him." But as soon as he did, his hand froze up. He couldn't move it. Panic set in, and he begged the prophet, "Please pray to God for me." The prophet did, and God healed Jeroboam's hand. Grateful, Jeroboam invited the prophet to his palace for food and a gift, but the prophet said, "No can do. God told me not to eat or drink here and to go back a different way than I came." So he left. Later, An old prophet in Bethel heard about what happened and wanted to meet the man of God. He caught up with him and invited him to eat at his house. The prophet from Judah said, "I can't. God told me not to." But the old prophet lied, saying, No, God told me it's fine. Come eat with me." So the man of God believed him and went to eat. While they were eating, the old prophet suddenly got a real word from God and told him, "Because you disobeyed God and ate here, you won't make it home alive." Sure enough, on his way back, a lion attacked and killed him. Strangely, the lion didn't eat him or his donkey. It just stood there by his body. When the old prophet heard the news, he felt guilty. He retrieved the man's body, buried him, and told his sons, "When I die, bury me next to him, because what he said about Jeroboam's altar will surely come true." Meanwhile, Jeroboam didn't change his ways. He kept promoting false priests and leading Israel into idolatry, sealing his fate for disaster. Moral of the story: when God gives you clear instructions, follow them, no exceptions. Even if someone claims to speak for God, if their words contradict what God already told you, don't fall for it. Disobedience, even when well-intentioned, can have serious consequences. Stay firm in what God told you, no matter who tries to sway you. 1 Kings 14. One day, Jeroboam's son got sick, and he panicked. He told his wife, "Disguise yourself and go ask the prophet Ahijah what's going to happen to our boy." She did as he said, but Ahijah, though old and blind, got a message from God before she even arrived. As soon as she walked in, Ahijah said, "Why you trying to play dress up? I got bad news for you. God made your husband king, but he turned his back on him. Instead of following David's example, he led Israel into worse sins. So now, disaster is coming. Your son, he's going to die as soon as you step back into the city. And as for Jeroboam's dynasty, it's over. God is going to wipe out every single male in his family, whether slave or free. Their bodies won't even get proper burials. They'll be eaten by dogs and birds." Sure enough, as soon as Jeroboam's wife stepped back into the city, their son died. Israel mourned him, but Jeroboam's downfall had already begun. He reigned for 22 years, then died, and his son Nadab took over. Meanwhile, over in Judah, Rehoboam wasn't doing any better. The people were out here wild and setting up idol worship spots, doing all kinds of detestable things, and acting no different from the pagan nations God had kicked out before them. Because of this, in Rehoboam's 5th year, Egypt's king Shishak invaded. He raided the temple and the royal palace, snatching all the gold Solomon had stacked, including the gold shields. Rehoboam had to downgrade to bronze replacements, a serious fall-off from his father's wealth. Rehoboam ruled for 17 years, constantly at war with Jeroboam. When he died, his son Abijam took over. Moral of the story: leadership without obedience leads to downfall. Jeroboam's fear made him turn to idols, and Rehoboam's arrogance led Judah into sin. Both lost God's protection, and their kingdoms suffered for it. If you want to stay blessed, don't just seek success. Seek God first, or everything you build will crumble. 1 Kings 15. Abijam, Judah's king. Short rule, same mistakes. After Rehoboam died, his son Abijam, also called Abijah, took over Judah. He ruled for 3 years, and just like his father, he did evil in God's sight. He kept up the same sins, but because of God's promise to David, God didn't let Judah completely fall apart. He kept the kingdom intact, not because Abijam deserved it, but because David had been faithful. Abijam and Jeroboam stayed at war the whole time. Then Abijam died, and his son Asa became king. Asa, Judah's king, a good king who cleaned house. Asa was different. He ruled for 41 years and did what was right in God's eyes. He cleaned up Judah, got rid of the idols, shut down the fake worship sites, and even removed his own grandmother, Makkah, from her position as queen mother because she had set up an idol to Asherah. Asa burned the idol and stayed committed to God. However, he didn't take down every high place, and later in his reign, he relied more on political moves than on God. When King Baasha of Israel started beefing with Judah and blocked their borders, Asa didn't seek God. He took silver and gold from the temple and paid off King Ben-Hadad of Aram, Syria, to attack Israel from the north. It worked, and Baasha backed off, but God wasn't pleased with Asa trusting alliances instead of him. Even so, Asa was still one of Judah's better kings. When he died, his son Jehoshaphat took over. Nadab and Baasha, Israel's cycle of chaos. Meanwhile, in Israel, Jeroboam's son Nadab became king, but he was just as wicked as his father. He ruled for only 2 years before a man named Baasha assassinated him, wiped out Jeroboam's entire family, just like the prophet predicted, and took the throne. Baasha ruled for 24 years, but he was no better. He led Israel deeper into sin, keeping up Jeroboam's idol worship. His reign only set Israel up for more judgment. Morale of the story: legacy matters. Abijam's reign was spared only because of David's obedience. Asa saw success because he honored God, but even he struggled with fully trusting him. Meanwhile, Israel stayed on a self-destructive path, proving that when a nation follows bad leadership, disaster follows. Choose to walk in obedience, and the blessings will outlast you. 1 Kings 16. So, God sent a message to Baasha through the prophet Jehu. Basically, God was like, I gave you this position, made you king over my people, but you out here wilding just like Jeroboam, leading folks away from me. Now because of that, I'm wiping you and your whole family out. Your people gonna be left for the dogs and birds. Baasha died, and his son Elah took over, but Elah wasn't any better. He was out here drinking and partying instead of running the kingdom. One of his own officials, Zimri, plotted against him and took him out while he was drunk. Zimri didn't stop there. He wiped out Baasha's whole family, just like God said would happen. But Zimri only lasted a week as king. The army didn't rock with him, so they made Omri their king. Zimri saw the writing on the wall, locked himself in the palace and set it on fire, taking himself out. Omri took over, but instead of learning from the past, he took Israel even deeper into wickedness. He was worse than all the kings before him. When he died, his son Ahab became king, and Ahab, oh, he was on another level of evil. He married Jezebel, started worshiping Baal, and completely turned his back on God. He even rebuilt Jericho, ignoring the curse Joshua had spoken over it. Moral of the story: when God gives you a position, he expects you to handle it right. Every king in this chapter had a chance to do better, but they kept choosing power, greed, and sin over God. And every time it ended in disaster. The lesson? If you don't handle your blessings right, they can be taken away. Stay aligned with God, or you might just fall into the same cycle of downfall. 1 Kings 17. Elijah, a prophet from Tishbe, showed up and told King Ahab, "Listen, because y'all keep turning away from God, there won't be any rain, not even dew, until I say so." And just like that, a drought hit the land. God told Elijah to lay low by the Kerith Brook, where he could drink from the stream. And get this, God sent ravens to bring him food every morning and night. But after a while, the brook dried up because of the drought. Then God told Elijah to head to Zarephath, where a widow would take care of him. When he got there, he saw a woman gathering sticks and asked her for water and a little bread. She was like, "I barely got enough for me and my son. After we eat this last meal, we just gonna wait to die." Elijah said, "Nah, don't be scared. Make me a small loaf first, then cook for yourself and your son. God said your flour and oil won't run out until the rain comes back." And just like that, her jars never went empty. She always had enough. But then her son got sick and died. She cried out to Elijah, asking if he came just to remind her of her past sins. Elijah took the boy, laid him on the bed, and prayed hard. He stretched himself over the child 3 times, begging God to bring him back. And God did it. The boy came back to life. The woman was shook and said, "Now I know for real that you're a man of God, and everything you say comes straight from Him." Moral of the story: when you trust God, He provides, even in the middle of a drought. The widow thought she was on her last, but her faith kept her blessed. And when things got dark, she saw God move in a way she never expected. The lesson: trust God even when it looks impossible. He always comes through. 1 Kings 18. After 3 years of no rain, God told Elijah, "Go see Ahab. I'm about to send rain." So Elijah went. Meanwhile, things were getting real bad in Israel. Ahab's top official, Obadiah, was secretly a man of God. While Jezebel was out here killing prophets, Obadiah had been hiding 100 of them in caves and sneaking them food and water. Ahab sent Obadiah to look for water, and while he was searching, he ran into Elijah. Elijah told him, "Go tell Ahab I'm here." Obadiah was shook. "Man, if I do that and you disappear, Ahab's gonna kill me. You know he been looking for you everywhere." But Elijah promised he wasn't going anywhere. So Obadiah went and told Ahab. When Ahab saw Elijah, he said, "Oh, so you the one causing all this trouble in Israel?" Elijah fired back, "Nah, you the problem. You and your family turned away from God and started worshiping Baal." Elijah called for a showdown. He told Ahab, "Gather all the people and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah to Mount Carmel." When everybody showed up, Elijah said, "How long y'all gonna be stuck between 2 opinions? If God is real, follow Him. If Baal is real, follow him." Nobody said a word, so Elijah set up a challenge. "We each take a bull, put it on an altar, but don't light the fire. Then we'll both call on our gods, and the one who answers with fire, that's the real God." Everybody agreed. The prophets of Baal went first. They called on Baal from morning till noon, but nothing happened. Elijah started clowning them. "Y'all better yell louder. Maybe he sleep. Maybe he on a trip." They went even crazier, cutting themselves and shouting, but still nothing. Then Elijah stepped up. He rebuilt God's altar, dug a trench around it, and had people pour 12 large jugs of water over the offering, just to make sure nobody thought this was a trick. Then he prayed, "God, let them see today that you are the real God and I'm your servant." And boom! Fire came down from heaven and burned up everything: the bull, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. The people fell on their faces, shouting, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" Elijah had them capture the false prophets, and he took them out. After that, Elijah told Ahab, "Better eat and drink, 'cause I hear the sound of heavy rain." Then he went to the top of Mount Carmel, bowed down, and prayed for rain. He sent his servant to check the sky 7 times, and finally a small cloud appeared. Elijah told Ahab, "Get moving before the storm stops you." And just like that, the sky turned black, the wind picked up, and heavy rain came down. Ahab rode back to Jezreel in his chariot, but the Spirit of God gave Elijah supernatural strength. He ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to the city. Moral of the story: you can't fake power. Only God can show up like that. Baal's prophets made a whole scene, but they had no real connection. Meanwhile, Elijah called on God and he responded instantly. The lesson? Stop playing the fence. Choose who you're going to serve. And if you're walking with God, trust that when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. 1 Kings 19. After everything that went down on Mount Carmel, Ahab went home and told Jezebel what Elijah did, how he took out all her prophets. Jezebel was furious and sent a message to Elijah. By this time tomorrow, you're dead. Elijah got scared and ran for his life. He left his servant in Beersheba and went deep into the wilderness. He sat under a tree and was like, God, I've had enough. Just take me now. Exhausted, he fell asleep. Then an angel woke him up and said, Get up and eat. Elijah looked around and saw fresh bread and water. He ate, drank, and went back to sleep. The angel woke him up again. Eat some more. You got a long journey ahead. Fueled by that meal, Elijah traveled 40 days and nights to Mount Horeb, the same mountain where Moses met God. He found a cave and stayed there. That night, God spoke. Elijah, what are you doing here? Elijah said, God, I've been out here doing your work, but Israel keeps turning their backs on you. They killed your prophets, tore down your altars, and now they're trying to take me out too. God told him, Step outside. I'm about to pass by. Then a powerful wind tore through the mountains, but God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the ground, but God wasn't in the earthquake. Then a fire blazed through, but God wasn't in the fire. Then there was a gentle whisper, and that's where God was. Elijah covered his face and stood at the entrance of the cave. God asked again, Elijah, what are you doing here? Elijah repeated his complaint, and God basically said, Listen, you're not alone. I've still got 7,000 people in Israel who haven't bowed to Baal. Now go back and do what I tell you. Anoint Hazael as king of Aram, Jehu as king of Israel, and Elisha as your successor. Elijah obeyed. He found Elisha plowing in the field and threw his cloak over him, a sign that he'd be the next prophet. Elisha left everything behind, cooked his oxen as a farewell meal, and followed Elijah, ready to serve. Moral of the story: even the strongest people get tired, but God meets you where you are. Elijah was ready to quit, but God fed him, strengthened him, and reminded him he wasn't alone. The lesson? Just because you don't see God moving in loud, dramatic ways doesn't mean he's not working. Sometimes he's in the quiet moments, giving you what you need to keep going. 1 Kings 20. King Ben-Hadad of Aram pulled up on Israel with his whole squad, 32 kings deep. He sent word to King Ahab, Everything you got, your silver, your gold, your best wives, and your kids, belongs to me now. Ahab, being weak, was like, All right, it's yours. But then Ben-Hadad got greedy and said, Matter of fact, tomorrow I'm sending my people to search your palace and your officials' houses. Whatever they want, they're taking it. Ahab finally grew a backbone and told Ben-Hadad's messengers, Tell your king. Nah, I can't do that. Ben-Hadad got heated and sent back a threat. I swear by the dust of Samaria, I'm about to wreck everything. Ahab clapped back. A warrior shouldn't brag before the fight even starts. While Ben-Hadad and his crew were getting drunk, a prophet came to Ahab and told him, God is about to hand this army over to you, so you'll know he's the real one. Ahab asked, Who's going to start the fight? The prophet said, You will. Ahab gathered 7,000 troops and launched a surprise attack. Ben-Hadad was still drinking when Israel struck, and his whole army fell apart. He barely escaped on a horse. Later, the same prophet warned Ahab, They're coming back next year, so get ready. Meanwhile, Ben-Hadad's advisors told him, Israel's God must be a God of the hills. Fight them in the valley and we'll win. So Ben-Hadad regrouped and came back with an even bigger army. But God sent another message to Ahab. Because they said, I'm only the God of the hills and not the valleys, I'm about to show them who I am. Israel, looking outnumbered, still managed to take out 100,000 Aramean soldiers in one day. The rest ran to a city, but the walls collapsed on 27,000 of them. Ben-Hadad ran and hid. His servants told him, Ahab's king show mercy. Go beg for your life. So Ben-Hadad humbled himself, put on sackcloth and pleaded with Ahab. And instead of finishing him off like God wanted, Ahab made a peace treaty and let him go. Later, a prophet disguised himself and set up a lesson for Ahab. He told a fake story about a soldier who let a prisoner escape. When Ahab said, That man deserves punishment, the prophet revealed, Surprise, that man is you. God told you to handle Ben-Hadad, but you let him go. Now your life will be taken in his place, and your people will suffer. Ahab went home upset, realizing he messed up big time. Moral of the story: when God gives you a mission, don't compromise. Ahab had victory handed to him but let his enemy go, and it came back to bite him. The lesson? Obedience isn't just about winning battles. It's about following through on what God told you to do. 1 Kings 21. So there was this man named Naboth who had a vineyard right next to King Ahab's palace. Ahab saw it and was like, Let me buy your vineyard so I can turn it into a vegetable garden. I'll give you a better one or pay you whatever it's worth. But Naboth said, Nah, this land been in my family for generations. I can't give it up. Ahab went home salty, pouting like a kid. He wouldn't eat, just laid in bed mad. His wife Jezebel saw him and was like, What's wrong with you? Ahab told her, Naboth won't sell me his vineyard. Jezebel rolled her eyes and said, Boy, you the king. Get up, eat, and relax. I'll handle this. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, stamped them with his seal, and sent them to the city leaders. She set Naboth up by having two shady men accuse him of cursing God and the king. The people believed the lie, and Naboth was stoned to death. Jezebel went back to Ahab and said, It's done. Naboth is dead. Go take his vineyard. And Ahab did just that. But God wasn't letting that slide. He sent Elijah to confront Ahab. When Elijah pulled up, Ahab said, So you found me, huh? Elijah fired back, Oh yeah, and I got a message for you. You murdered an innocent man just to take his land? Because of this, disaster is coming for you. Your whole family line is getting wiped out, just like Jeroboam's and Baasha's. And Jezebel, dogs are going to eat her body in Jezreel. And your people, they going to be left for the birds and dogs. Ahab was the most wicked king Israel ever had. He let Jezebel lead him straight into evil. But after hearing this, he actually humbled himself. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, fasted, and walked around like a broken man. God saw this and told Elijah, Since Ahab humbled himself, I won't bring this disaster in his lifetime. But his sons, they gon' feel it. Moral of the story: just because you got power doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. God sees everything. Jezebel thought she could manipulate her way through life, but her end was already written. Ahab thought he could steal and get away with it, but judgment was waiting for him. The lesson? Be careful what you do, 'cause God holds everyone accountable. But even if you've messed up, a humble heart can still move him. 1 Kings 22. For 3 years there was no war between Israel and Aram. But one day King Jehoshaphat of Judah went to visit King Ahab of Israel. Ahab was like, Hey, Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us, but Aram still has it. You down to fight with me to take it back? Jehoshaphat said, I got your back, but let's ask God first. Ahab gathered 400 of his prophets, and they all said, Go to war. God will give you victory. But Jehoshaphat wasn't convinced. He asked, "Is there a real prophet of God we can ask?" Ahab sighed and said, "There's one guy, Micaiah, but I hate him. He never says anything good about me." Jehoshaphat was like, "Come on, man, don't say that." So they sent for Micaiah. Meanwhile, Ahab's prophets kept hyping him up. One of them, Zedekiah, even made iron horns and said, "With these, you'll gore the Arameans till they're gone." When Micaiah arrived, they warned him, "Listen, all the other prophets are saying victory is guaranteed. Just agree with them." Micaiah said, "I can only say what God tells me." At first, he sarcastically told Ahab, "Go ahead, you'll win." But Ahab wasn't buying it. "Tell me the truth," he said. Then Micaiah got real. "I saw Israel scattered like sheep with no shepherd. That means you're going to die in battle." Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat and said, "See, he always brings bad news." Micaiah kept going. "God put a lying spirit in these prophets to lead you to your downfall." Zedekiah slapped Micaiah and said, "You saying I'm lying?" Micaiah replied, "You'll see when you're hiding in fear." Ahab got mad and ordered Micaiah to be locked up, saying, "Feed him prison rations till I return." Micaiah said, "If you come back alive, then God didn't speak through me." Ahab and Jehoshaphat went to battle. Ahab, knowing the prophecy, disguised himself, but had Jehoshaphat wear his royal robes. The enemy soldiers focused on Jehoshaphat, thinking he was Ahab, but when they realized it wasn't him, they backed off. Then a random soldier fired an arrow, and it just so happened to hit Ahab right between his armor. He tried to hold on, but by evening, he bled out and died. Just as Micaiah said, Israel's army scattered. Later, when they washed Ahab's blood off his chariot, dogs licked it up, just like Elijah prophesied. Jehoshaphat went back to ruling Judah and followed God, but he made the mistake of partnering with Ahab's wicked family in a business venture. God shut it down. Ahab's son, Ahaziah, became king of Israel, and he was just as bad as his father, worshiping Baal and making God angry. Moral of the story: be careful who you listen to. Ahab surrounded himself with yes-men who told him what he wanted to hear, but it led to his downfall. Micaiah spoke the truth, but Ahab ignored it and paid the price. The lesson: just because something sounds good doesn't mean it's from God. Always seek real wisdom, even if it's not what you want to hear.